Hello and welcome back guys to another video on full stack Next.js development. A quick revamp to our last video. You have learned about what are built-in HTML elements and custom components with examples. And in this video, you're going to learn about the differences between client-side components and server-side components. If you're new to this channel, make sure that you check out my last videos in this playlist and do subscribe to this channel. So without wasting any more time, let's get back to our whiteboard and start learning. So to understand how server and client components work, it's helpful to be familiar with two foundational web concepts. The environment your application code can be executed in, that is the server and the client, and the network boundary that separates server and client code. Let's understand this with the help of a diagram. So this diagram shows a web browser on the left and a server on the right, separated by a network boundary. Here a client refers to the browser on a user's device that sends a request to the server for a replication code. It then turns response it receives from the server into an interface the user can interact with. On the other hand, server refers to the computer in a data center that stores your application code, receives requests from a client, does some computation, and sends back the appropriate response back to your web browser. Each environment has its own set of capabilities and constraints. For example, by moving rendering and data fetching to the server, you can reduce the amount of code sent to the client, which can improve your application's performance. But to make your UI interactive, you need to update DOM on the client. Therefore, the code you write on the server and the client is always not the same. Certain operations, for example data fetching or managing user state, are better suited for one environment over the other. Network boundary is a conceptual line that separates the different environments. In Next.js, you can choose where to place the network boundary in your component tree. For example, you can fetch data and render blog posts on the server using server components, then render the interactive like button for each post on the client using client components. Similarly, you can create a navigation bar that is rendered on the server and shared across different pages. But if you want to show an interactive state for links, for example, if you would like to highlight an active link, you can render the list of links on the client. A component layout that has three components as its children. First one, header, the page section, and the footer. The page component has two children. First is the post and second is the like button. The post component is rendered on the server and the like button is rendered on the client side. Behind the scenes, the components are split into two module graphs, the server module graph or a tree that contains all the server components that are rendered on the server, and the client module graph contains all the client components. After server components are rendered, a special data format called the React Server Component Payload or RSC is sent to the client. The RSC payload contains the rendered result of the server components, placeholder for where client components should be rendered, and references to their JavaScript files. React.js then uses this information to consolidate the server and client components and update the DOM on the client. Let's see how this works. Let's first start with an example of a server-side component and the client-side component. Now if I get back to my personal website that is built in Next.js and I view source code of this website, let me line wrap this. You can see that it consists of all the JavaScript, HTML and CSS code of my website. If I go below, you can see everything related to my website is present. I can also show this to you by going to a particular section, copying some text and searching it through my view source code. You're able to see that the respective paragraph element and the text is visible on the view source code of my website. But now if I get back to a React.js website and if I view source code of this website, line wrap this, you can see that even though there is a lot of information on the website, there is nothing related to that content on the React.js website. Except there is a div with ID root which consists of JavaScript code and few basic script tags. The reason why this happens is because in React.js application, when a web browser sends a request to the server or the required web page, the server then returns the client-side application code which is rendered by a web browser depending on the web page that we are accessing and the user interaction. Everything related to navigation and client-side DOM manipulation is done by JavaScript code on the client side. Due to this, when we view the source code of a web page, we don't see any HTML elements since there was no HTML response from the web server. This also causes problems with search engine optimization since when a web crawler tries to crawl a web page, it is not able to find any HTML content just like us. On the other hand, on my website, web page is generated on the server side with all the information related to HTML, CSS and JavaScript, and the response is then returned by the server to the web browser. Due to this, when the web crawlers crawl my website, they are able to scan my website and content, also find suitable audience based on their search. So I'll quickly get back to the Visual Studio Code editor and I'll open my blog title.jsx file. Also, before doing any changes, let's confirm what was the UI for this application. So this is our existing UI for our web application, and this is the title that we see for blog title example, and this is the existing text that we see. Now going back to Visual Studio Code editor, I would like to make this text dynamic, and to do so, I'll use useStateHook provided by React. And don't worry what is useStateHook or what are hooks, we'll learn about this in detail. But for now, I would add a title, add a mutation function for this, call it update title, assign it a default value, let's say old post title. I would import useStateHook from React. I'll simply remove any existing text that we had. I'll call the value of our state variable, that is title. I'll assign it over here. And now if I save this, you'll see that I get an error which says that you are importing a component that needs useState. It only works in a client component, but none of its parent are marked as useClient. So they're server components by default. So what does this mean is that you cannot access any browser API or browser or client-side related functionality in the server-side code. So in order to make this component functional with the browser APIs and all the client-side component features, we'll have to add useClient at the top of this file. And when we save this, you can see that the code compiled successfully. Now, if I get back to my web browser, try to refresh this, you'll see that there are no errors. Also, if I show you an example, I'll revert this back. I'll again make this a pure server-side component. I'll also remove anything that we added over here and comment this useState. Also comment this import. I'll again refresh the web page. And now if I get back to my code editor and I'll log something over here, let's say test. And if I save this, you can see that the log has been shown over here on the server terminal. And if I get back to the web application and refresh this, you'll see that there is no code over here in the web browser. This is because the log has been shown on the server. And by default, every component in Next.js is a server-side component. So let's make this a client-side component again. And now we'll save this. And you'll see that there are two test consoles over there on the server as well as on the client side. I'll quickly clear the console to show you again. I'll run the application again from the scratch. Since we have not accessed our web page, there is no console. But if I go to the web application and refresh this, you can see that there is a console log message on the client side as well as one console log message on the server side. This is because our component is statically generated and it will have this console logged on the server first, and then this code will be rendered on the client side again. So if I get back to our web browser, you can see that we see old post title over here, but now I would like to change this to something else, and in order to do that, I'll use onClick event handler. I'll call my function update title and I'll update it with something like new post title and save this. Now if I get back to my web browser, I'll quickly refresh everything, and if I click on this text now, you can see that the title has been updated. Also, there are console logs changing on the client side. Let's see this again. If I click over here, you can see that the application has rendered again. So because of re-rendering, you'll see console log over here again, but not on the server side. Since server side code runs only once when it is being served by the server. This is because on the server side, the content is generated statically first, and then it is sent to the client side where it is dynamically generated on the client side again, because we have used useClient feature over here. We will learn about static and dynamic re-rendering and generation in a detailed video later on, but for now, this is it for server side and client side components. So see you guys in the next video. Do like and subscribe this video and channel, and keep watching.